The Soviet Gulag. Just saying the words makes you shiver, doesn't it? And yet, it's almost impossible to imagine what it really was unless you've read the survivor accounts, unless you've tried to picture yourself in a place where every breath, every movement, every thought could be turned against you. It was not just a prison system. It was a machine for breaking people, and it had its own precise ways of doing it, almost surgical, almost polite in its cruelty. You arrived sick, hungry, or scared, and somehow by the time you left, if you ever did, you were neither of those things. You were something smaller, less than yourself. People think of labor camps and imagine hard work, maybe a fence, maybe a guard with a rifle. But the work itself was the first instrument of torture. At Kolyma, men dug for gold in permafrost with primitive tools, their fingers cracking, their lungs burning with ice dust. Some died simply from overexertion, but even that was not enough to satisfy the camp system. No, the camp wanted more. The body had to be weakened, the mind emptied, and the human soul tested to see how long it could endure humiliation, hunger, and cold without breaking entirely. And yet the cold, the hunger, the impossibility of the work, all of that was just the beginning. There were cells called shizo, and when I first read about them, I couldn't stop picturing myself inside one. Tiny, freezing boxes where you could neither sit nor lie down comfortably, sometimes inches of water sloshing on the floor to make it icy. Imagine standing, hours turning into days, your body numbing in ways you didn't know possible, your hands shaking so violently you could hardly hold anything. Some prisoners went mad in there. Some died quietly, almost slipping out of life without anyone noticing. Solzhenitsyn describes it with such clinical horror, yet somehow he also conveys the dread that eats at your mind when you're there, alone, stripped of choice. I can't help but wonder what I would have done. Could I have stayed sane? Could anyone? Hunger, too, was weaponized. This wasn't about scarcity. This was deliberate, planned, and cruel. One prisoner missing a quota might get a thin soup. Another would get none at all. People ate snow if they could find it, sometimes the frozen scraps left behind in the work areas. Imagine that. Your body screaming for calories while your mind tries desperately to calculate how much energy you've burned just to survive another day. And the twist. Hunger wasn't just punishment for laziness. It was a slow method of control, a way of bending people without breaking bones, at least not immediately. And then there was the cold. Siberia is not forgiving, and the Gulag turned it into a torture device. Guards would make prisoners stand naked outside in the wind. Buckets of icy water would be poured over them, and sometimes they would leave them like that until frostbite set in. Imagine it, your skin stinging, your teeth chattering uncontrollably, and the knowledge that even though you're alive, your body is betraying you. Sometimes they were made to dig holes in the frozen ground or stand in stress positions for hours. Positions so painful that the body itself screams, but you can't move, can't even close your eyes, because every inch of motion is forbidden. And the psychological torment, oh, that was perhaps the worst of all. Imagine not knowing who you could trust. Guards, of course, were threats, but friends were not always friends. Informants could be anyone. A casual word spoken in confidence might be reported, and suddenly, your life becomes a negotiation with death. Sleep deprivation was routine. The conveyor method meant interrogators rotated around the clock, shouting, questioning, and accusing. 1 hour you're awake, 1 hour you're convinced you're about to die, and then it starts again. You almost welcome hallucinations because they distract you for a moment. And still, the questioning never ends. Eventually, even the strongest gave up, naming names, confessing to things that never happened, and sometimes even turning against those they loved. It's almost impossible to read these accounts without thinking, how long would it take for me to break? Labor, in its own way, was a death sentence. The camp didn't need to kill you outright. Digging, hauling, freezing, starving, it was all designed to wear you down slowly, day by day, until your will finally eroded. Shalamov wrote in Kolyma Tales that survival itself became a kind of miracle because death was everywhere, not just in the frost or the hunger, but in the exhaustion that made your muscles fail and your mind blur. You weren't a prisoner. You were a cog in a machine designed to grind down life itself. Some punishments defy reason. Prisoners could be tied to trees and left to be devoured by mosquitoes, buried in snow up to the neck, or forced to dig their own graves only to be left halfway buried. And yet the scariest part wasn't the occasional cruelty. It was that cruelty was ordinary. Being cold, hungry, beaten, humiliated, and afraid was just life. The system had no need for dramatic flair. Its brilliance was in its banality, in its ability to make horror seem routine. And yet, even there, some resisted. Secret poems were memorized because paper was forbidden. Acts of kindness, shared scraps of food, quiet solidarity. Solzhenitsyn recalls how people would whisper lines of poetry to each other, reminding themselves that they were still human. That small spark of defiance, that insistence on dignity in the face of relentless cruelty, is perhaps the most astonishing thing about the Gulag. Reading about it now, it makes you think, how can ordinary people do such things to each other, and how can they survive it? Could I have survived it? Could anyone? And more chillingly, how close are we today to systems that reward cruelty, banish empathy, and reduce humans to numbers? The Gulag isn't just a history lesson, it's a warning. Power unrestrained, fear institutionalized, cruelty normalized. These are things we must guard against. If you're still watching, thanks. Really. I know this wasn't easy to sit through. It wasn't easy to talk about either. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? The Gulag, it's not just history. It's something more than that. It shows us what people can survive, and also what they can do to each other when everything good gets stripped away. Honestly, I'm still thinking about parts of it. Some of the stories are hard to shake. What about you? Was there anything that stuck with you more than the rest? Something you couldn't stop picturing? Drop a comment if you feel like sharing. I'd actually like to know what hit hardest for you. And look, if you think this kind of stuff matters, if remembering things like this feels important, then maybe like the video. Share it if you want. Subscribe too if that's your thing. It helps more than you'd think. We like to believe the past is over, but it's not. What happened back then, the systems, the silence, the fear, those things, they can show up again. Different names, different places, same pattern. That's why remembering matters. That's why we talk about it. Because forgetting, that's how it starts.